Episode number 185 of Sunday Golds, a Florida State baseball podcast, now live on social media, on X, YouTube, and everywhere else you watch us. We appreciate those of you tuning in to see the numbers on the eyes that are watching us live starting to tick up. And I know you're excited about what Florida State baseball is doing. A lot to get into. I'm Arya Masudi alongside my co-host, as always, Brett Nevitt. Brett, good to see your face. I think for an entire show on this episode, Chip Baker filled in pretty admirably in your place last week. And we tried a little trio there, and it turned into a duo pretty quick, but some story time. Always good to hear from the big shooter. But we missed your insights for sure. A big weekend for the Noles against Clemson. And we've got a lot to get into in this podcast episode.
Yeah, we'll definitely never be trying to use StreamYard from the phone again. Definitely learned the lesson there. But glad that Big Shooter could get on, missed getting to talk to him. But yeah, a very nice weekend for FSU, and looking forward to getting to talk about this past weekend, this upcoming weekend, and potentially how everything could affect a couple weeks from now when FSU begins their postseason run.
Let me ask you this. Did you at least shoot a good round? Were you happy with how you golfed on that day?
Yeah, it was decent. I think I went out there the next day too, and I was shot a better round the next day, but I had to stop midway through it because I found out a certain pitcher was going to be in the lineup that night, so had to get to writing. But yeah, it's been nice to get down a little bit after my semester just ended, but so have a little bit of free time, but getting into that busy time for baseball season. So looking forward to this last final push of the regular season and the postseason.
We get a lot of questions all the time as I'm walking around Hauser now, and you're not there every weekend. People go, well, what's Brett doing? Can you set the record straight on what it is that you're pursuing down there in South Florida?
Yeah, I'm working on getting my MBA in sport management at FAU. I'm doing it on campus. So yeah, I've been having classes on Tuesdays and Thursday nights for about 3 hours, and 2 semesters through it now, and have 4 semesters left when you include both summers. So done by the end of next summer. But yeah, I have about a month off now. So looking forward to enjoying that while getting to dig deeper onto baseball season.
Yeah, congrats are in order ahead of time for you, my friend. And I know you're a good student and you're paying attention, but I also know those text messages come in to me while FSU baseball is happening at the same time. So I know one eye is at least always on the Noles, on the Diamonds, especially in those midweeks. Man, I think we got to pay some bills real quick before we get into more of this and talk about, the weekend at Clemson. I think to give you a rundown on what this episode will include, why it was important to win 2 out of 3, what it does for Florida State's resume moving forward as they continue that race for a top 8 national seed, some different trends that we saw this weekend. Of course, Ben Barrett getting to start at first base, the pitching rotation, the pitching staff, some injury updates. I know we're all wondering about John Abraham. And then, of course, Brett, I think we'll talk on some different things in terms of what the Noles will do as they get healthier, but then also preview the epic series that is always Florida State and Miami. I think it's college baseball royalty, 2 programs at their finest. And in college baseball, for my money, it's the best rivalry in college baseball in terms of pure tradition. And you talk about just historic teams, what they have meant to college baseball as blue bloods of the sport. So that's what we'll get into. I do want to point your way towards Alumni Hall. They have been a friend of our programs now for a couple of seasons. And I actually went in myself, and those of you watching got one of those vintage Florida State throwbacks. And we want to help you get some too. SG15 is a code that gets you 15% off. Again, these are pretty sweet. I walked in there in Tallahassee. You can go online as well, but Alumni Hall has done great work with us. They've made this program possible and allowed me and Brett to get to some away games too. So major shout out there to Beth and everyone who works at Alumni Hall. I can't recommend it enough. It's my go-to when I need Seminole gear and want to stock up for the postseason. So you guys go there. Metro Deli as well, downtown, if you want a bite to eat. I know the Noles will be hosting a regional. I think that's something Brett and I will talk about in terms of what the Seminoles locked up this past weekend in Clemson. So if you're planning to come to Hauser this weekend for the Miami rivalry or to Hauser for the postseason, at least regionals, stop by Metro Deli and say hello to our friends there. Have a bite. Their cheeseburger wrap is out of this world, and they love their Florida State baseball. And say hello to Johnny Mack as well while you're there, who's in the Animals of Section B and does a great job of just being so hospitable. All right, Brett, bills paid. Let's get into the weekend. Man, that's a hard place to play for a lot of teams. I think Clemson was 19-8 going into the weekend at Doug Kingsmore Stadium. And it feels like Florida State can't usually figure out how to beat the Tigers there, right? And before I can get into the analysis of the specifics of each game and the strengths and the weaknesses, the positives and the negatives, I had to remind myself at the end of the weekend, and it was a stressful weekend where it felt like the Noles were holding on at times to find a way to get the series win. I had to remind myself these need to be cherished, and these are valuable series victories away from Tallahassee, especially in a place that has not been kind to the Noles and a place that is trying everything they can outside of the game of baseball to get in your head, right? Whether it's a unique playing surface, call it what you will in the warning track. There's not really a warning. You just kind of run up a hill, and Braden Dowd found out the hard way at one point this weekend, or they pipe in music, which I'm not sure is legal, but they haven't been, reprimanded by the NCAA yet, but they pipe in music in between pitches. And we all make fun of the Six Flags song and here and there, but there's a lot going on in Clemson, and they were desperate, and they needed to win that series, quite frankly, to just stay alive, to make the postseason. And all of that being stacked up against a team, Brett, that has been riddled with injury like Florida State and is playing without one of the best players in the country, to go there and find a series victory over Clemson. I had to remind myself after Sunday that that's to be celebrated and to be, I think, commended, and a job well done ultimately, before you even talk about what it means for the rest of the season in this group.
You could tell how desperate Clemson was getting by how much they were turning up "We Like to Party" by the end of the series. First game, it wasn't there much. Second game, you could start to hear it creep in a good bit. And then third game, they were pulling out all the stops there. But yeah, it's an interesting place. Didn't make the trip there this year, but every time I've gone there, that's just how I feel about it. Very interesting place. But yeah, I think that was the first time since 2014, I want to say, that they won a series there. So, and they go there every other year. So it just tells you how hard it is to go up there and win. And we've seen wacky, crazy stuff happen multiple times. And, I think those things kind of popped up a little bit this weekend. Like, it seemed like at times it was like, oh boy, here we go again. Especially, I think in the game that they won, where at the end of the game, John had to get pulled out and ended up ending on that fly ball that the cameraman thought was going to the moon. But yeah, so, got rid of the demons there a little bit, I think, especially for some guys that were on the team a couple of years ago. John himself was involved in some of that stuff a couple of years ago that resulted in some of the collapses that they had. So really good to go out there and get a series win, especially in the time of when you needed to do it. Like, you needed to go out there and get a couple of quad one wins. So that's really big to add to your resume at this time of year. And you kind of stopped the schneid of, you had lost 6 ACC road games and the last couple of times you'd gone on the road. So good to get some confidence on the road again in case you do have to go to an away super regional.
Yeah, tough environment, especially those first 2 nights. And like you said, Brett, you knew Clemson needed it, and they showed that. I think they played hard. They're just struggling right now to play, complimentary baseball at Clemson. And I actually thought there was a lot of talent still in that Clemson team, and it just hasn't clicked for them for whatever reason. And I don't want to talk too much about Clemson because I do think this is about Florida State, Brett. I thought the pitching staff did a really nice job. All 3 of your starters got you into the 6th inning at least. And then your bullpen did a pretty nice job too. And, we go back to what we've, I think, talked about all year. And if you can pitch and you can limit other teams from scoring and be hard to score on. And pitching and defense go hand in hand. I know Sunday's game got a little wonky with the errors here and there, and it wasn't perfect throughout the weekend with, the wild pitch. I count that as defense because I had really hoped Carnes would be able to block that. But I thought overall your defense did a good job too, especially up the middle with Frazier and McCulley. You threw out some guys on the base paths with Schmela and Stutzer. And overall, I thought Florida State was hard to score against. Final scores of this one, Brett, were what? 8-4, lost 4-3, and then won 6-3, 5-3. Did I have it right the first time?
Yeah, correct.
So you gave up 11 runs total on the weekend in 3 games. And I do think anytime you do that, you're going to give yourself a chance to beat anybody. At home, on the road, it could be the number 1 team in the country. It could be a team that's trying to fight to just make the NCAA tournament and keep their season alive. But I just go back to the way they pitched, man. And Wes Mendez on 1 day short rest, if you want to start there, it didn't look like he had his A-plus stuff, but then showed you kind of the moxie and the growth of a guy that's turning into a pro pitcher in the way that he battled through 6 innings and ultimately gave you another quality start, and a guy that I do think should be the front runner right now for ACC pitcher of the year as we enter the final weekend of conference play.
Yeah, I think, first of all, just for the whole staff, it's been, I think recently for the last, 8 games now, I think they haven't allowed more than 5 runs in the last 8 games overall, and that's 2.79 ERA in the last 71 innings on the mound. So overall, they've just been doing a good job of, being the run prevention unit that I think they thought they would be coming into the year, both defensively and on the mound. And you mentioned the middle infield as well. I thought they were awesome this weekend between Frazier and McCulley. And that's now 12 games where you've had Frazier and McCulley starting on the middle infield. And in those 12 games, they're 10-2. And all 12 of those games are without Miles. And overall, they're 15-4 when Frazier has been at shortstop. So he has kind of solidified that position for them, which has been a big boost. But yeah, I thought Wes, obviously it wasn't the most impressive stat line of the year, or the most impressive stuff, but I was just really impressed with how he was able to get through that start with the line he did, with the stuff that he had. I mean, I think if you asked him, he'd probably say he had like his C stuff compared to what we've seen for most of the year. I just thought he, probably some of it was being on short rest and just how much he has thrown overall this year. But it was like, to be able to get out of that outing with just 3 runs in 6 innings and come up with your team up as much as they were, I thought it was a really solid outing for him. And really, it seemed like Clemson's whole offense this weekend was Jaron Purify and their 2 out hitting. If it wasn't for Purify, I don't know if Clemson would have scored like any runs this weekend. But yeah, I thought West just once again showed some, just bulldog mentality and getting through that outing the way he did and putting together a quality start. I mean, every start he's had this year, he's gone 5+ innings. Like, what you're going to get when he's out there. You're going to get a quality start, and sometimes it's going to be really, really dominant. Other times it's not going to be as dominant, but he's still going to give you quality innings and a chance to win.
Yeah, and I have a chart up that I wish I could share with the class, but just his post-game pitching report, 102 pitches, and the fastball was in play 37 times, and they actually went to the off-speed stuff 40 times between the curveball and the changeup, and it allowed him to get 6 of his 10 strikeouts on off-speed. And I think on a day where the fastball maybe didn't have the zip and the life and the carry through the zone that we normally see it have, and a lot of that's understandable when you're pitching on a day short rest. Mendez showed you that he can really spin it, right? And the changeup, you've been saying, Brett, for a while, is as good as anyone's in college baseball. It's a plus pitch and has opportunity to be a plus pitch at some point in his career. And to me, the makeup for Wes, to use one of the scouting terms, has taken the biggest leap forward. And it's last year when an inning would go sideways on him, it would compound, right? And he wouldn't be able to either salvage the start or find a way out of an emergency situation. And I just go back to how impressive he has been to me in innings where he might give up a home run or he might give up a couple of hits or his defense behind him doesn't, play up to par. And Brett, he just kind of nods to himself where he has a bad walk or a hit by pitch on a 2-strike count that is frustrating. And he's able to really calm himself down and find a way to manage the start. And he's learned that getting your team into the 6th and 7th inning is a positive. And that is considered, doing your job. It's not always about having 10 strikeouts. We've seen starts this year where he's only had 4 or 5. But some days the game plan and the script calls for you to be able to just get your team deep into a game. And I thought, he actually ended up striking out double digits in this game, right? And that's not a Clemson team that strikes out a lot. They are a bat-to-ball team that tries to make it tough on opposing teams by putting the ball in play. Really just can't say enough about him. At this point, to me, that's a guy that's earned some first-round consideration for the summer draft. I saw MLB.com give him that honor of being in one of those comp rounds, I think, and he's starting to tick upwards in the eyes of a lot of scouts, and a lot of that has to do with makeup, man. And I'm just, from where he was against Oregon State in that final start last year to where he is today as we enter the final weekend in conference play, the fact that he's battling, Jason DeCaro and Riddell and Lavonis for ACC Pitcher of the Year just shows you the growth of Mendez and a job well done from Micah Posey, right? Who has helped develop his overall game and really give him that composure and, the calm presence. I just, every time Mendez has the ball, Brett, I feel like Florida State has the advantage and will win. And that's a good feeling to have.
Yeah. And I think it is so important for them to win when he is out there. I think they're 5-0 in ACC series when he does win his start within the weekend series. And they're 2-2 when he loses his start. So that kind of tells you, and they lost, obviously they got swept in those 2 weekends that they did lose the series. But I think the biggest thing for West this year is just being ahead in counts. And he did this again. I mean, he was 18 of 26 first pitch strikes, 14 leverage counts on 18 opportunities. Produced 16 whiffs. I mean, the fastball was really 90-92 for most of the outing, which is lower than what we're used to seeing from Wes. And he was still running it up to 94 at times and even grabbed a 94 there in the last inning of his outing. So no worries about the velocity. But, like you said, he really mixed in the off-speed stuff really well in this outing. Went to all 5 pitches, mixed it up at different times. I thought Micah did a pretty good job calling for him. So, yeah, it's been a really fun watch this year, getting to watch Wes week in and week out. I definitely think he has deserved the honor of ACC Pitcher of the Year to this point, with 1 weekend left to go.
Yeah, it's going to come down to, I think, this final weekend between DeCaro and Mendez. In my opinion, I think that's kind of where this battle is, right? DeCaro has the better ERA, and then you go to, he's on probably the better team as of right now throughout the year and the higher ranked team. And, Mendez kind of has the so-called sexier stats and the bigger, numbers, and his ERA has been fantastic. I mean, he's at a 2.42 ERA in 78 innings. I think he's only 0.2 innings, 2/3 of an innings behind the ACC lead in innings pitched for a starter, 23 walks, so 103 strikeouts, 190 opposing batting average, and a .97 whip. I mean, man, pretty impressive. We're biased, so we're of course going to. He would have our vote for ACC Pitcher of the Year. I also think the world of Jason DeCaro and think the world of what Riddell and Lavonis are as talents. So it's going to be a tough one when the awards come out Monday, and it may come down to this final start. And Mendez will have a lot of eyes on him, I think, with Florida State, Miami.
Yeah, the last point I'll make on West is he's got 7 starts of 6+ innings pitched, 8 starts with 1 earned run or less, and 10 starts with 7 strikeouts or more. And this past week was his 4th start with double-digit strikeouts. So it's just been consistently really good all year, and that's what shows up in the numbers as well.
Yeah. Can I ask you one last thing about Wes, and we'll move forward into the rest of the rotation and bullpen? But one thing that stood out to me, you talked about the off-speed pitches too, but the curveball 17 times in play this weekend, which we haven't seen the curveball as much. And that was one of his better pitches, I thought, last year. He got a 36% chase rate off of that. What does that allow him to do with the rest of the arsenal when the curveball's in play like that and he's able to get swing and miss and getting guys to go after it, out of the zone for a strike?
Yeah, it's probably the most he's ever gotten swings and misses on that pitch, I would have to guess. I feel like a lot of the time we've seen him use it for more of like the pitch for a strike, get me over first pitch. But it was Savoy, the leadoff batter, who has really good numbers all year, is that he would kind of got him in back-to-back at-bats with it, I think. And both of them were pitches that were, pretty far out in front of the plate, and he just made Savoy look pretty silly with them. So, I think that tells you that, he's doing something right with the breaking ball, and it's obviously sharper than we've seen in the past. And that shows up in the velo too. I mean, he's throwing it mostly at 79 miles per hour. And I feel like last year in the past and in earlier this season, I feel like we've seen the curveball like 75, 76. So it seems like he's just throwing that pitch a little bit sharper. And when you can add another, swing and miss pitch to the mix, I think that just makes it even harder on hitters to try to, select a pitch out of those ones to be looking for. There's nothing you can really sit on with Wes at this point. You can't sit on the changeup, curveball, slider. Like, he's mixing it up to both left and right-handed hitters. I don't think he's very predictable at all at this point. So when you can just get a little bit sharper of a breaking ball to go along with the slider as well, it's just such a complete mix that he has right now.
Pretty awesome to watch. And again, I know who I'd vote for if I had one, and I get to watch him every week though. So a lot of good pitching in the ACC this year in terms of frontline guys, and pretty awesome from Wes Mendez. I'm excited to see what he does this weekend, and against Miami. And if Florida State makes a deep run in the postseason, Brett, it's because Mendez was a dude, right, in those moments for you and helped you win those games going toe to toe against another team's best. So. What'd you think? Let's put together Beard and Moore as starters. I actually came away impressed with Trey Beard on the weekend. I know he got right, so to speak, by Purify, who a lot of respect for the way that kid plays the game, and you can tell what he means to Clemson. Really, really good athlete, and has gotten a lot better in his time as a Tiger. And I do think if he had been healthy all year for Clemson, they might be in a different discussion right now in terms of being on the right side of the bubble for the tournament. But he gives up that home run. But to me, other than that, I thought Beard gave you a much better start considering he was on the road, hostile environment, than what we've seen over the past few weeks. And the one thing that I wrote down in my notes as I checked them back, the curveball, again, seemed to be, I don't know if there was something in the scouting report with Clemson and curveballs, or Florida State saw something in the charts with those hitters for the Tigers that Micah and the staff put together with Rob and Drew. But Beard's curveball was more in play, and he had feel for it. I mean, it's not necessarily a plus pitch in terms of a scouting metric, but he's able to throw it for a strike, and it seems to be a little bit sharper than what we've seen in his time at FAU with the slower moon ball. But if he's able to mix just that curveball, Brett, to me, it helps get opposing hitters off of the changeup, and it turns him into a 3-4 pitch mix guy. And ultimately that allows you to mix and match and get you deeper into ball games, which is what I thought we saw against Clemson.
Yeah, I think they've definitely made an adjustment with Beard to throw more breaking balls and try to get away from just the simply, fastball changeup 50-50 split. And, I don't think it ever really was a 50-50 split between those two pitches, but for the most part, you could narrow it down to those two. But, I charted all three of those starters outings, and, charting Beard, it was like there were just as many breaking balls, if not more breaking balls, than the fastball changeup combo. And I think all four of his strikeouts came on the two breaking balls, the mid-80s slider and the curveball that was coming in at I think he was throwing it from the mid-70s all the way into the upper 70s. But yeah, I thought, obviously, like you said, Purify got the fastball off of him. I think it was just a middle fastball on a 1-1 count. in the last inning he was out there, I thought there was some, batted ball, poor luck for him. Yeah, I think the first two batters got on base, both on bloop singles, I want to say, on balls off the end of the bat. And FSU had some batted luck throughout the weekend as well with some bloop singles. And that's going to happen sometimes. And he didn't produce too many whiffs against Clemson, compared to what we're used to seeing from Beard. He was behind in some counts, but this is 2 weekends in a row. At least you're getting him into the sixth inning, which is an improvement. And I think, there were I've seen some people ask about flipping more in Beard at this point, but this week specifically, I don't think is something that it is a potential for, because you're moving up. Obviously if you moved more to game 2, you'd be moving him from Sunday to Friday. More was limited to like 60, I want to say upper 60s with the pitch count. But I think that has more to do with, he's coming back from injury a few weeks ago. And he's injury prone as well. But yeah, I do think at least the length that Beard is giving you the last 2 weeks is a step in the right direction. And it's probably coming from that adjustment that they're making with the pitch mix to get the breaking balls a bit more involved and kind of just change the report that teams have on Beard and what the game plan that they're coming into to face him.
Yeah, spot on. Brett, I sent you a text message with Beard's chart against Clemson. So while I kind of muse, I'll let you see if you can open that PDF and maybe it'll help you with some of your observations with Beard there as well and help solidify those. But I am curious because this might be a conversation for a couple weeks from now, maybe a week and a half or two as we get into regional time and we do that preview. Beard seems like he'd be a really good option for Florida State on a Friday in game 1 of a regional against a 4 seed. Because of the way he can mix that changeup, I do think he can keep those types of teams off balance in the way that, Dorsey was able to as well. And we've seen Lincoln in his time at Florida State and Notre Dame really opt for his best pitcher to go second because he believes that that's been the best way to win a regional when you're talking about having to win 3 games that weekend and be able to be efficient. And so chances are either Beard or Moore are going to go game 1 on that Friday night in Tallahassee. I say Friday night. Noles have also opted to play the day game over the last couple of years. Do you agree with my sentiment that Beard would be a good option against a 4 seed that comes in and maybe hasn't seen that quality of a changeup that Beard possesses?
Yeah, I think the history at FAU would tell you that you could feel pretty comfortable with him against a team of that caliber. I think, if you had Beard as your midweek starter facing a team like that week in and week out, that you would probably be seeing a lot of different numbers than you've seen from him throughout this year, starting on the weekends. So yeah, I think it's just, are you comfortable putting yourself in a situation where possibly you're only getting 5 innings in that start? So yeah, I think it's just going to have to depend on a comfort level, and a lot of that will probably be determined by this weekend. And if you were able to get into the weekend at the ACC tournament and allow those guys to get another starter too.
Yeah. What'd you think of Bryson Moore against Clemson? To me, the fastball command of it to both sides of the plate, and he seemed to be going in against a pretty tight zone on that day in game 3. And so he didn't have a lot of strikeouts, only 4, but did what I thought when Bryson Moore's at his best does, and that's 94 to 96 with the heater to both sides of the plate, generating weak contact and pitching you deep into ball games. I mean, he was at 85 pitches, and you and I were talking, do you send him back out for the 7th? Because it seemed like he might have one more inning in the tank. I have my theories on why they held him up. I think you do too, and you might have mentioned that. But if this Florida State team's identity is on pitching, Brett, it's going to be those 3 guys pitching at a high level. And I thought Bryson gave you yet another good start on the season.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I had Moore at 75 pitches on my chart, and looking at the box score, it's not even on there. I think something weird was going on with the box score pitch count, just because it's not even showing up on his game logs either. But that was
You
just
might
I was just
be
yeah, I
85
was
75
yeah.
pitches.
But yeah, I more did exactly what you need your Sunday starter to do, especially when your offense gives you some help early in the game. And that's just throw strikes and get ahead in counts, and mostly with the fastball, really too. And I think they're leaning more into the changeup too with Moore. I thought we saw a lot of changeups, and sometimes with the camera angle, it was hard to tell exactly what pitches were changeups and which pitches were cutters because they're kind of in the same velo range. But for the most part, I felt like a lot of them were changeups. He got most of his whiffs were on changeups. I think he had 7 whiffs and 6 of them were via that pitch. But he was 16 of 22 first pitch strikes. He had 7 of 9 leveraged counts in those opportunities. Had a lot of really quick innings. Looking at it, I think the first inning he had was the only inning he was over 15 pitches. The last 5 innings he was out there went 14, 11, 10, 12, and 12. So just a really efficient outing for him, and exactly what you wanted to see after the week prior, where the fastball command was pretty iffy. It seemed like they made a very good adjustment week to week with his fastball and the mechanics. I'm guessing there was something going on there because it seemed like he was just much sharper, both with the command and also the velocity. I mean, he was reaching back for 96 a couple times, I believe, and really sitting in the 94, 96 range throughout that whole outing with the fastball and with the cutter and changeup both ranging into the low 90s. So, a pretty really, really, really positive outing for Moore, and one that excites you both with the stuff and command.
Yeah, 75 pitches is correct. So you had that right, which I think only solidifies what I was thinking. He could have gone one more. You do
Mhm.
wonder, though, with another short week coming for Florida State, um, wanting to make sure that the guys are as healthy. Was it Beard, I think, was at 85 and Bryson Moore was at 75, and they did a good job of limiting the pitches on those guys, because you are going to
Yeah,
move up today as well.
yeah. The other thing I was going to add was Purify was due to lead off the 7th,
Okay.
and I think he was 2 for 2 off of Moore with a triple and a single. And the triple being the one where Dowd kind of had the awkward play on that weird hill in the outfield. So that was probably some of it too. Although I think Purify ended up getting on base. Oh no, Purify ran into an out at second base actually.
Pretty
But
big.
that probably some of the reason too.
Yeah. Let's see. I've got Bryson Moore's PDF, Brett, I'm trying to send you so that you can see his chart on that. What do you make overall of Florida State's rotation? It seems to be as solid as you'll find in the ACC, and really is the identity of, I think, this team at this point right now, as the Noles continue to try and find ways to win, and especially with an offense that is trying to manufacture runs.
Yeah, I think you feel pretty good about it right now. You know what you have in Mendez. You feel like that's probably the ACC pitcher of the year as your ace, and I feel like we've been able to say that a lot of times in the recent years now between Parker, Jamie, and now Wes. It's been pretty fun to watch those left-handers go and do it year in year out. And then Beard, just the fact that you've gotten him through the 5th the last couple of weeks, I think, is something that's really positive for you. And like I talked about, them kind of changing up the pitch mix a bit and changing up the look for teams, I think, is making a difference for him. And then Moore is someone that, as a Sunday starter, I think you feel really good about. There are some ups and downs in there. There's some injury history as well. But for the most part this season, that has been fine except for one missed start. And now I think everything just turns to the focus on how healthy is John Abraham.
Yeah, I do want to talk about Johnny and the health there. But let's talk about the bullpen as a whole over the weekend. Your thoughts on the pen, and then if you want to transition that, Brett, into what losing John might mean, and hopefully we get a positive injury update from Link when he talks to the media on Wednesday.
Yeah, I gave up a couple runs there, and I think, gave up more free passes than you'd want. And things got a little shaky at the end of the game in the ninth in game one when John had to come out and you had to go to other guys. And I'm sure some of that is, John has ended that situation every time this year. You're probably expecting the game to be over and you're not really expecting to have to be put into the fire all of a sudden. But ultimately, they need to go out there and get the job done. And, I think Purcell had a 4-pitch walk to load the bases that brought Manka in to face the left-handed pitcher, and Manka got behind 3-1, but his 5th pitch was caught by Dowd in deep left center to end the game. Kinnear, I thought, was definitely better his second time out there for the weekend than the first time, but Kinnear overall, I think that was the first run he had given up in a long time. The one run he did give up in the 7th before they had to go to John. But, I think Kinnear overall, I was looking at his numbers in the last 7 outings, last 7 appearances, 13 innings pitched, only given up 4 hits and 2 walks. That's a 0.46 whip. He has faced 46 batters and only allowed 6 base runners. So, as good as John has been, Kinnear has been right there with him since really the middle of April. And I feel like you feel really good about him when he goes out there. As for everybody else, it's, a little bit of a question mark. Purcell was a lot better on Sunday and closed that game out for you to pick up the save there. O'Leary, I thought it was an interesting spot to bring O'Leary in, just with how many wild pitches he's thrown this year and how many curveballs he's spiked, and knowing, kind of the struggles that Carnes has had with pitches in the dirt. And they had done that the week prior too, and I don't think it had got them the week prior, but this time it did. And ultimately, Clemson was able to win that game because of that one run. But yeah, I think with John, it's not an arm thing. Link said it's an side oblique thing, which, I don't know how many times we've said that at this point this year. I feel like they've probably had about 6 oblique injuries they've dealt with at this point. I know Purcell had one earlier in the year. Chase is dealing with it a bit. And, it just seems like something that's popped up a lot recently. So Link is supposed to talk tomorrow. I believe his press conference is at 11:30 on Wednesday morning. And then the ACC student athlete availability report will probably come out around 24 hours before the series begins. So 6:00 tomorrow night. So yeah, we'll see if they're willing to push John into this weekend, if that's even a possibility. But the severity of what he's dealing with probably won't really be known until Link talks or until that athlete availability report comes out tomorrow night.
Yeah, both him and Chase, I think, obviously will be on the forefront of the minds of Seminole fans. So that'll be very interesting. I do want to talk about Chase in a moment, but to your point about Kinnear, him being able to land his first pitches for strikes has just completely changed everything for him. He's got the slider he feels really good about, the curveball. Seems like he throws changeup more to lefties, this year, and then he's throwing the breaking balls to righties, and he's able to mix and match fastball above the belt and above the barrel off of that. And it's just been awesome to watch. He's been terrific. And that's a guy who has realized that hitting is difficult, and that if you're around the zone, that the chances are pretty high that you will have some success as a pitcher. And I think, him and Whited, to me, embody that more than anyone out of the pen for Florida State. Not named John Abraham, of course. But those two guys have come in and just pounded the zone. I thought it was cool to see Whited get the opportunity we had been kind of foreshadowing for a couple of weeks that would happen in the back end of Florida State's bullpen in the back end of a weekend. And I thought he looked pretty good too. Pretty unfortunate to give up one of those runs on a, pop-up that needs to be handled there at first base. And that type of thing can't happen. But overall, Whited and Kinnear both know who they are, know that they're not trying to overwhelm you with pure stuff, and that they're going to mix and match and attack you, and both have the ability to go 3 innings if you need them, 50 pitches plus. So kudos to both of those guys.
Yeah, I'll just add on Whited real quick. I think that's the type of role and type of situations you'll see him come into, when they're kind of up like 3-4 runs where, it's not a huge lead, the game's not over, but the only way to really blow those leads is to give up huge innings. And when you're not giving up free passes and you just have a guy out there throwing strikes, you feel pretty good that you're going to be able to minimize damage and not like hand a team a big inning. So, I don't think he's a pure lefty left guy because, the changeup is really the primary pitch for him. And you saw him throw it lefty left a little bit. I think he got a strikeout on one of the lefty left changeups. But, I think it's a nice little addition to have into the pen, at least someone that is going to go out there and put the ball in the strike zone and, mix it up with 3 pitches.
Yeah. Ditto. Huge on Purcell as well to be able to come in and have that outing. You need him because that was someone you really prioritized, this past off season when you wanted to get guys in from the portal. And I think you saw why in those flashes, right? That he's shown you a fastball up to 94, 95 and does have a good breaking ball and got the strikeout to end it there on Sunday. And you need all your guys firing on all cylinders, especially if Abraham's not available for a little bit. We'll see. You're going to need more of those guys to step up, and that includes O'Leary and Manka. Unfortunate, right, with O'Leary there, because it felt like he was going to get the kid to either strike out or weakly, make contact and get us out of that inning. And, just it's deja vu right now with O'Leary and runner at third and, the breaking ball. And I don't know if that was what was called, was breaking ball in the dirt, but, it's peculiar to me, as well, because neither of your catchers have shown consistency in being able to block that pitch specifically. And, I don't know that, in that moment you want to test fate, right? And see what happens, even if maybe I think the chart probably tells you that that's, the opposing batter, that's hit, that's where it's blue and that's where you want to go with that. And you just gotta kind of weigh it and go, hey, is the chart superseding the moment there with a runner at third in a tie game late? But really felt like the Noles could sweep, Brett. That's kind of the hard part there, is you felt like you had Clemson figured out for all 3 games, and kudos to them for getting 2, but it did feel like, didn't it, that 3 was on the table after you come out of there.
Yeah. I mean, the only loss you have is a 1-run loss, and that's one where the run came on a wild pitch in the 8th inning. And the thing about that Saturday game was just your offense kind of just went quiet. At the end of the day, that game probably falls in your offense. You can't not put a runner on base the last 5 and what was it, 2/3? I think Clemson retired the last 17 batters faced, and a lot of that was Danny Nelson did a really good job, and Frazier really got screwed on the first out of the 9th inning, on a strike 3 call on a 3-2 pitch that was at his shoelaces. But overall, that was just not a good enough offensive effort on Saturday. But I thought overall for the weekend, they did a good enough job and really put together some good at-bats as an offense against a pitching staff that I really think highly of, and I think is going to be even better next year. But it's a pitching staff that has a lot of stuff on it. But at the end of the day, when you only have a 1-run loss and you outscore them by, I think, what'd you end up outscoring them by? 6 runs over the 3 games. So, it was a close series all across, but it felt like your pitching staff really did a good job the entire weekend of holding Clemson's offense to really, really minimal damage, especially in that park.
Yeah, 21 hits allowed all weekend by your pitchers in 3 games. That's really good, right? At 7 a game. Did they get to double digits on any of the 3 games in hits? I don't think so, but I'd have to go back and look. I know the night that they beat Florida State, they only had 6 hits. But tough, right? You feel like a sweep was there, you didn't get it. But again, like I led off the show with, Brett, I had to remind myself how hard it is to win at Clemson for Florida State. Really in anything, if you think about it. It's not an easy place to go if you're the Noles in sports right now, but especially baseball. So job well done there. Offensively, yeah, game 2, a bit disappointing, I think, especially because the offense went cold for a long stretch. Give some credit, though, to the bullpen. The Nelson kid came in and did a really good job, and Simerson's got a nasty breaking ball. That's real. And, they did enough, and their strength is their pitching as well for Clemson, especially the pen, and they were able to lean into that to help find a way to win one. But I thought Friday and Sunday, pretty good offense. I mean, you ran the ball out of the yard 6 times on the weekend, 15 hits, if I'm not mistaken, on Sunday. Did leave a lot of guys on base, but you were close a few times to breaking that game wide open. I know there were a couple of at-bats Brody had and even McCulley had that I thought would be a base hit or even a grand slam off the bat, and it just kind of died. And Dowd had some good ABs go unrewarded. But offensively, it does seem like they are trending in a better direction in terms of bat to ball and putting pressure on an opposing defense to make plays and finding more free passes. It's not all the way there, I don't think, the way Link wants it, but I do think they've taken major strides offensively. And, they're getting some serious contributions from guys that hadn't been giving you that at the beginning of the year, right? Namely, a guy like Brody DeLamielleure, who we've talked about on this pod now a bunch, but Brody really looks like the hitter that we all thought he could be if he continued to progress and stayed healthy. And now he is healthy. And, on a 14-game hitting streak, these are numbers that you had on your Noles247.com article, Brett. And I encourage people to go and read that. Brody's been one of the best hitters in the ACC over the last month. And at the right time, the adjustment they made to get him lower and get him in his legs to be able to allow him to stay through the zone a little bit longer with the barrel has led to less strikeouts. And because of that, I think you're tapping into some natural exit velocity there from Brody, and he's showing you power to all fields. And he's always been aggressive, right? Brett has always kind of hunted early in counts, but you're also starting to see him have the maturity if there's not a pitch, first or second pitch of an at bat that he feels like he can ambush and do damage with, to have some patience and be able to find something he can handle. But pretty amazing to watch Brody take this next step. I'm really happy for him. He's got a great family as well. And, a mom and dad who love him very much and have been waiting for this moment for Brody for a while. And the breakthrough's come at a good time for Florida State.
Yeah, he's just continued to mash over these last 14 games. And, I think this weekend alone had 7 hits and 3 extra base hits with 2 home runs, drove in 5 runs, had a sac fly as well. And it's a pretty similar approach to like an Alex Lodis from the right side. Like, he's not up there to take pitches. There's going to be chase. There's going to be chase specifically on right-handed breaking balls outside the zone, low and away. But he's up there to be aggressive, and he's going to do damage, and that's what he's doing now. And I think in that span, I want to say maybe he has 1 walk in that entire 14-game hitting streak. And the OBP might actually be lower than his batting average because of sac flies. But 6 straight multi-hit games, has 14 hits over the last 6 games, hitting 500 in that span. You have the numbers up on the screen here that I've put up earlier, but 14-game hitting streak, 443 average, 1231 OPS, 9.5% K rate. So just everything that he touches with his bat right now seems to turn into damage. And that's exactly what they need. But I feel like you're starting to feel pretty good about at least the top few in the lineup, and that's even without having Chase in there the last couple of weekends. So how he even gets back in there will be interesting to figure out. But the fact that you have these guys starting to click now, because I think we always feel really good about Dowd. You know what you're going to get from Dowd. Stetzer at this point is giving you power. Yes, there's a lot of swing and miss in there, but he's giving you the power speed combo that I think you would hope he'd give you. I think Stetzer has 6 home runs over the last month or so, and I think he's averaging like 1 home run per every 11 plate appearances. So you're starting to build a nice little nucleus at the top of the order, but all of that has really come from Brody swinging it as well as he has. There has not been many better hitters in the country in that span.
He's definitely become a star. And you go back to thinking, well, if Miles was healthy and Brody does come on at this point, what would that look like? And, it's interesting to think about. Those are the types of things that allow you to really be a national title contender with the pitching staff you have, is having a known commodity in Miles and a consistent, and then someone else taking that next step that has happened under Link Jarrett now each of the last few years, right? Someone's taken the jump, and 14, 15 game sample size for Brody still needs to be a little bit bigger for us to stamp, that statement that he has taken the leap and has been able to really turn the corner and become that guy. And maybe next year's the year for Brody, if he comes back and is a staple for your lineup. But you're seeing, I think, a taste and a preview of what he is capable of. And Brett, I remember the first fall ball he was here. You said, I really think Brody's got a shot, and it's serious talent to the opposite field. And he hits the ball hard. Exit velocities are there. And as pitch recognition gets a little bit better and he gets a little more confident, he's going to continue to get better. So good call on that from a couple of years back. And I do think this is a good question from Danny C on YouTube, asking, how would you adjust the lineup if Chase comes back? Feels like there's 4 spots where you could slot him, but all 4 players currently in those spots are batting well. I think, that's a good question. And Brett, I want to hear your thoughts. What would you do to the lineup if all of Chase, Stutzer, Dowd, and Alamalir are healthy? What would be the move, considering Shmela and Carnes are hitting the way that they are as well?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I think number one, I think we all know what Link wants to have in the outfield, and that's 3 center fielders, and he talks about that so much. And I think the outfield that gives you that ability is Chase, Dowd, and Stetzer. And that athletic, the 3 of those guys athletically would give you a really exciting outfield that can cover a ton of ground. And I think that's exactly what Link wants to have. But you just can't take Brody's bat out of the lineup right now. So that would move Brody to DH. And then you're having to decide between the 2 catchers. Do you want to continue to alternate? Can one of them play first base potentially? I think Link was asked about that about a month ago at this point. And I think he kind of shot it down pretty quickly and said that, that wasn't really an option at that point. But it seems like everything is on the table at this point when Ben Barrett is starting at first base after not hitting since 2023. So, maybe they decide to work one of the catchers there with the way the 3 or the 4 outfielders have been swinging it when you combine how Chase was playing before he got hurt. But yeah, I think your best lineup would be having all 6 of those guys in there, and then Ben's not in the lineup anymore. But is that actually a possibility for one of those guys to play first base? I don't know if I could tell you that right now, but yeah, I think Nate, I think at this point has shown to be the better defensive catcher. I think this year they're 16-5 when Nate catches, specifically 8-3 in ACC play. And Carnes, their record with Carnes isn't bad, but they're 20-10 with Carnes catching, 9-7 in ACC play. But Carnes has continued to hit too, and his bat, he has 6 multi-hit games over the last 11 games with a 341 average and 440 OBP in that span. So all these guys have kind of given you a reason to have them in the lineup. And we're kind of starting to get back to a point where we were talking about this stuff earlier in the year, but they just have never all been healthy at the same time to really even have that discussion. So it's like, when will Chase get healthy? When will he be available to play? And will all those guys still be healthy when we get to that point? I certainly hope so. But we need to get to a point at some point for the first time this year where all those guys are healthy and swinging it well at the same time, which I think we're closing in on.
Yeah. Ideally, yeah, right. You would get all those guys in the lineup, and that would probably mean Carnes at first base, and you just hope that it's adequate, right? I think that's the best you can hope for, and that's what Putnam was, right, when he's playing. I think Putnam's probably your best defensive first baseman right now.
Definitely.
Just the bat's not, it's not playable at the moment in the lineup the way that it is. And it's more, you need some of these guys in the lineup, and Shmela, like you said, has shown more consistent catching ability and the ability to throw guys out on the base paths in addition. And that was a nice throw he had to get Purify, I think, on a throw to second at one point this weekend. I pause because you start to think about all of those names that we just mentioned at their best. and finding the best version of them. So it's a good question from Danny C, because I have been thinking about it. And all of those guys at their best, you do have a lineup that's pretty formidable. I mean, it's not, you wouldn't mistake it for the best lineup in the ACC, but it's a lot better than what you would have said, on April 12th, right? Like we would have had a completely different discussion a month ago. But to your point too, Brett, this is the first time I think we're getting healthier with a lot of these guys, and hopefully they're able to be in play. And we'll see how that goes. I don't know what that looks like with Carnes and Shmela and trying to figure out. I don't know for a fact that Chase is 100% healthy and ready to get back in there. Chase did say on our, ACC Network broadcast during the midweek last week that this would be the week he would take swings again. So they're probably going to test that out this week and see. It might not be against Miami that he comes back, but maybe for the ACC tournament. So that conversation could be tabled for another week. Nate Shmela just keeps hitting, man. I mean, he ambushes fastballs. He doesn't miss many of them. And he's on an 8-game hit streak, like your article had stated, and a couple of home runs. He slugs. He's a hard AB, and he just kind of has some grit to him, man. And there's that makeup, that word again, the M word. And I just like watching Nate Shmela play baseball. I mean, there's nothing about it that you would put in a brochure on how to do it the right way. It's just he's a throwback, and he goes up there and, no gloves, nothing, just kind of, let's go. Let's hit. And sometimes teams need that. And I think maybe this team needs that more specifically without Miles in the lineup, is a veteran that's just kind of a good locker room and clubhouse presence that has been around college baseball a long time and isn't taking anything for granted. He's just kind of playing with house money for whatever the final, few months of his baseball career probably are. And, very, very Link Jarrett throwback type of player that you would have seen at Notre Dame. Just a hard out, and a guy that when you least expect it comes up with the big hit. And how many of those guys at Notre Dame could we have said that about a few years ago? Quite a few of them. So coming at a good time for Florida State. You keep asking, people are asking, how does FSU have an RPI of 7 and a strength of schedule of 5 and 36 wins? So the guys like this have just picked up the slack. And you certainly hope it continues, right? As we get into postseason, you don't want this to be them kind of crescendoing and peaking only for it to come crashing down in the postseason. But it's a big home run in game 3 to set the tone for Florida State and get the Noles on the board.
Yeah, 5 hits over the weekend in that homer. I think that was the second homer he's hit in the same 8-game hitting streak. And both of them have gone to the opposite field, which you usually wouldn't expect from Nate. He's a very pull-happy hitter, and you see teams shift him that way. So to see him go the opposite way a couple of times recently has been, pretty exciting to see. Starting to open some things up more for him, and hitting 406 over the last 8 games with 13 hits in that time. So he's been productive for them. And, I think the other guy to highlight is Carter McCauley. Just continues to play very, very well for this team. I mean, both offensively and defensively. Outside of the strikeouts, he's been a very, very, very positive player for them. In the last 13 starts he's had, he's hitting 341 in that time with an OPS just above 1,000. He scored a run in 10 of those 13 games. He has started at second base 13 times this year. In those 13 games, he has yet to make an error, knock on wood. Errorless in 56 total chances. They've turned 12 double plays with him at second base, and including 7 straight games with at least 1 double play. So, there's not many teams where you're going to look through the game log and they're going to have as many double plays as FSU does consistently. They literally have at least 1 every single game. And Link talks about how big those plays are, and the biggest reason they've been able to turn them at the rate they have is because of McCauley and the way he's turning, the way he's been able to turn the pivot for the double plays at second base. A couple of the ones they turned this weekend were really, really special, and ones that I think off the bat you didn't really think they had a chance to turn it, and then both McCauley and Frazier showed off their arm strength. So. He's just been a major positive for them in the last few weeks. He's probably been well above, like one WAR really over the last like 3 weeks or so. And when you look at the conference only stats for the team, I think of qualified hitters, he actually leads the team in average in conference play. So, he has really turned it around offensively. And when you put that with his glove and what he's able to do with that, you have a pretty darn good player for them in recent weeks.
No doubt. You know what's pretty amazing? And before I get into my thoughts on McCulley, because this includes McCulley, Brett, in the ACC, Chase Williams was hitting 343 in 67 at bats, right? So 27 conference games. Obviously, not all the guys were healthy for all of these. Williams 343 and 67 at bats. Schmela 333 batting average in 75 at bats. McCulley 317 batting average in 63 at bats. Brody DeLamielleure 313 and 67 at bats. Hunter Carnes 300 in 80 at bats. And Gabe Frazier 349 in 43 at bats. I don't know that those are numbers you would have thought you would have seen, right? FSU's been better in conference than they've been out of conference. And McCulley's a big part of that. Schmela's a big part of that. To your point about Carter, they made a swing adjustment with him prior to the Pitt series, and he had gone into the cages and really worked his tail off in between the Stanford and Pitt series. And they've been able to flatten his bat path a little bit, which has allowed him to keep his barrel in the zone a little bit longer and get his hands to the ball a little quicker, which is a good mechanical adjustment by the entire staff. And for him to buy in, and you can, I think, see in that series, right, Brett, he had some success and the confidence built for Carter and the weight of the world kind of lifted off his shoulders. And he's been a positive for you at the bottom of the order. He's perfect where he is, I think, at 8 or 9. And it allows him to really set the table again for the top. And if he's giving you slug from the bottom of the order, you do become a much tougher lineup to face as we get into the most important time of the year. I would like to see him work a few more free passes, but that's something I'd like from the entire team, not just him specifically. And other than that, I just can't say enough about the adjustment he's made, and the staff has worked hard with him and what he's provided you, because he's always been one of your best, if not your best overall defensive glove. And now that's allowed him to be a complete player for you in this stretch. And 341 batting average in his last 13 starts. But Brett, when you look at ACC play, like I mentioned, I mean, it's 317 and 18 starts, right? So he's been pretty consistent for you all throughout ACC play. And I don't know that you would have said that or believe that. I don't know if some people who are listening to this now believe that. And McCulley's been a real force for you. And so I go back to one of the things Link Jarrett said after, Miles went down, Brett. It's not going to be anybody that takes the mantle from him. There's nobody it's not next man up. It's every man up. And you don't have another talent to replace Miles. You need everybody to step in. And I even thought Ben Barrett looked comfortable enough at the plate. It wasn't perfect, but kind of funny to watch Benny B go out there and hit the baseball, and to see Jamie Arnold quote tweet you with dude rakes. People know. And guys who have been around Ben Barrett know, only how many strikeouts did he have on the weekend, Brett? 2, 3?
I think 2. I want to say 2.
That's not what I would have guessed, right? Coming in for his first live action. I mean, he was seeing 95 heaters pretty quickly. And I'm actually excited to go this weekend, to the dugout and ask him what was it like to see 95 for the first time in a couple of years, and what's that adjustment like. But he until he dropped the ball at first base, which was such a bummer because he was having a really good weekend overall. Until that moment, you were like, Link really just pulled a rabbit out of his hat this weekend. It's pretty genius. Clemson has no real book on what Ben Barrett is. You stick him there in the bottom of the order, and he's going to get a bunch of fastballs. That's what Clemson's going to. That's what anybody would throw you, right, for the first time when they don't have a book on you. And I mean, he looked good. Like, he looked comfortable at the plate. And if he keeps playing at first base, I just envision him running a baseball out at Hauser and the place losing it. And, the entire pitching staff and the bullpen going crazy as they watch Ben Barrett, one of their own, a captain, by the way, one of the captains on your team, having some success.
Yeah, I think, I would pay a lot of money to see Jimmy Bellinger's reaction when he got the lineup on Friday night, because Jimmy Bellinger, Clemson's pitching coach, was part of Ben Barrett's recruitment to FSU as a two-way player back in the 2023 class, and that was Jamie Arnold's class. Probably why Jamie had some thoughts on Ben hitting, but yeah, I mean, Ben used to be a really, really good hitter. I think, the reason that he stopped hitting, a lot of people were questioning it when you see the numbers referencing 2023, because he hit like 360 something. You're like, why in the world did that guy ever stop hitting? I think he was dealing with a nagging wrist injury, and that was something he had gotten cleaned up after freshman year. And, at that time just decided that he was just going to focus on pitching. And, I think if there weren't injuries on the mound, that Ben, it might have paid off for Ben on the mound too. I mean, we saw him up to mid-90s plus during sophomore year before injuries, and last year as well, but the command just wasn't there for him. And then, I think we've seen the velo come down a bit this year, and the command still hasn't come back. So I think for somebody like Ben, it's just like, you just go to your coach and say, I just want to contribute any way I can. I'll help you any way I can. I know I'm probably not going to help you out too much more on the mound, but like, this probably, I'm probably not going to be here much longer. He's the first guy in Link's program to make it to a year 4 at FSU. So, I mean, I think, it probably just got to a point where he was like, just give me the opportunity. They probably had him taking BP for a couple of weeks, looked good enough to put him out there. And I mean, those ABs he was putting together, I mean, he had a lot of hard contact, I thought. And he came out swinging right away. I think that first game, I want to say he went like 0 for 4 with 4 ground outs. And then there are a couple ugly swings in there, and Nelson got him on one fastball that ran in under his hands. But for the most part, I thought he looked really comfortable. And Ben looked the part, certainly, in the batter's box. I mean, he's 6'4" and 200 plus pounds. Like, I watched Ben a lot in high school as a two-way player and really, really liked him on both sides. I thought he was a really good third baseman, super athletic third baseman in high school that, was really projectable on both sides. So, yeah, I don't know how long this experiment will go on, if Putnam will get back in there. But it is a cool story, and I think it's fun to watch, and it's fun to see his teammates' reactions to it, and also the guys that have been with Ben before, like guys like Jamie. That tells you why Ben was voted a captain by his teammates this year. I think it speaks pretty loudly to his character.
I root for stories like that. It's part of what makes doing play-by-play and for you, journalism and covering the team rewarding, right? Are these Ben Barrett, Tim Becker types that come out of nowhere at times, and it just seems like they really do ignite your team. About an hour and 8 minutes into this, Brett, so we'll keep it brief, I think, over the next 7 to 10 minutes and try and fit in a Miami preview and talk a little bit of postseason resume. But we have the most viewers live that we've had since we began, and I think everybody's kind of excited and juiced for Florida State and Miami. And so those of you sticking around watching live, and those of you listening on podcast on demand later on Apple and Spotify and everywhere else, we appreciate you. We'll get into this preview. I think we got Canes fans in the chat now too. I saw you pop that up, Brett, with Canes Cats Heat 305. I know he's been ready for this series all year. So let's talk some Florida State and Miami. One of the best rivalries you'll find in college baseball. I said it earlier, I'll say it again. It's the best rivalry, in my opinion, in college baseball. And it's because of just what every series has meant, to both programs and what these series usually mean. I know Miami's not ranked right now. I do think they should be ranked. Like, that's a good Miami team. They have question marks for sure. I was looking at their resume, and I have buddies who follow Miami a lot, and I've called some Miami games in the past. So, 35 wins for the Canes this season, and 15 in the ACC, but an RPI of 34, which doesn't make a ton of sense. Usually that would mean a higher RPI. And I did some deep digging on that. And Miami has not played a tough schedule on the year. That's been what's hurt them, I think, the most, because those metrics would tell you that the Canes should be in contention to host with 35 wins and 15 in the ACC. Certainly this weekend against Florida State should be what puts them over the top, right? If you win the series, it should be a huge feather in your cap to be able to host. But 34 RPI, SOS of 57, non-conference SOS of 161. And outside of Florida, Miami really has not played a hard schedule at all. They got some of the easiest teams in the ACC this year and avoided a lot of the big names in the ACC. You know, back in the Atlantic and Coastal days, they would have had to play Georgia Tech and Carolina. They didn't play either team this year, Georgia Tech or Carolina. So Florida State, I would argue, is their toughest ACC series test of the year. They've played at NC State, lost that series. They played Louisville, who's not been very good this year outside of Tage Davis being a star in the league. You know, they lost 2 out of 3 to Boston College, which turns out BC's pretty good. And, you know, they lost a series to Duke, but they found ways to continue to win all the games. I think their best series win is Wake Forest, which I do give them a lot of credit for. That is a good series victory for Miami. And I do think the Canes, if they beat Florida State 2 out of 3 this weekend and then go on a run in the ACC tournament, that RPI should jump up pretty significantly to a point where you will be talking about Miami as one of those teams on the table to host, because they are 6-6 in quad one wins right now. And 2 over Florida State and say 2 in the ACC tournament puts you in double digits. And now it's a different ballgame when talking resume. So Miami's resume is what it is. They're going to be juiced up and ready to play Florida State. I already know we saw their players are already kind of leaning into the rivalry with, you know, some talk earlier this week about Wes Mendez, and I love it. I think college baseball needs more of that, and that's what we want going into rivalry weekend. But Brett, as you kind of evaluate Miami, what stands out about the Canes and JD Arteaga's team this year?
Yeah, I think first of all, the student athlete availability report will be big this weekend to follow for Miami as well. You know, they've had what the heck is his name? Daniel Cuvée has been out for a few weeks. That's my guy too. I can't believe I forgot that for a second. Kyler's going to be happy with me, but yeah, Cuvé's been out for, I think, 3 weeks at this point. I think he had a stress fracture in his back. I think that's what it was, and he was supposed to be out indefinitely. And so I'm guessing he will not be back, but there's, you know, you never really know exactly when those guys will come back when they're listed that way. But the other one is Brylan West. I think that's how you say it. Is it Braylon or Brylan? Brylan West, who's their first baseman. He got injured in their game 2 against Louisville. He came out during that game. I was listening to the ACC pod on D1 earlier today with Bradley Smart, and he was saying that he came out after an awkward-looking play in game 2, and then he didn't play in game 3. Alex Sosa, who was their catcher, and then their DH was playing first base in that final game. So they're a bit banged up coming into the series offensively. And those are a couple of their better guys this year for them. Obviously, Cuvé's done it for 3 years since he was a freshman and is a super powerful right-handed hitter. So, yeah, I think you know exactly what you're going to get with their rotation, and Rob Evans, Lazaro Cholera, and AJ Siskar. Those have pretty much been the 3 guys for, I think, basically all conference play. And I think Evans had an injury scare at one point, but ended up being fine. And he's been very good all year. Their offense has really been carried by Derek Williams, who's had a really good year, and Alex Sosa. I think Sosa's coming off being ACC Player of the Week this past week. Both of those guys have an OPS above 1,100, 1170 for Williams, 1145 for Sosa. Sosa 15 home runs, Williams 14 home runs. Outside of that, the offense isn't super scary. Alonso Alvarez, freshman catcher, has been good for them, hitting 313. Looking at the numbers, it looks like he's been controlling the running game decently well too, and guessing that he's been pretty good defensively for them to go with him behind the plate consistently as a freshman. They're not super deep on the mound pitching wise. It's kind of those three starters, and then Lyndon Glidewell, who has 4 saves this year. But past that, they kind of have some issues with depth, which I think, that's what we've seen with a lot of teams. Once you get that team off their plan, which you can say that about FSU, once you get them off the plan, things can kind of get a little scary for them pitching wise. But and then the biggest thing with Miami is their defense has been very, very bad this year. The worst in the ACC. They've made 77 errors with the 958 fielding percentage. So,
oh moly.
Yeah, and I think I was looking at the ACC stats earlier today specifically. I don't have them pulled up right now, but I think they had made like more than 10 errors than the next worst team in conference play. But I'd have to go and look at those real quick.
I did some research earlier in the week. I was traveling, and I'm on the call this weekend in the broadcasts with Chris Chavez and Chip Baker, and just calling my friends in Miami who cover the team, and they've made an error, I think, in double-digit straight games. I mean, it's like every game they have at least one. In most games they have at least 2. And as of like 2 weeks ago, and I'd have to check again, they were tied with Maryland for the worst in P4 for fielding percentage. Like the teams underneath Miami that had worse defense were teams in like the SWAC and the MEAC. And so that's not good. If Miami is going to get bounced out of a regional, it's because I think their defense will let them down, and their bullpen, which, like you said, isn't very deep. Gladwell's really good transfer portal guy. And I believe they got Nick Robert back recently, and he throws heat and has serious octane. Trying to get him going again would be big. And guys like Darius and Dorn, they need those guys to be good, I think, as they get into the thick of this thing. And I believe they have one more transfer they brought in Ryan Bilka, who has been hit or miss for them. 34 strikeouts in 28 innings is indicative of pretty good stuff, but they lean on their starters. I do think, having done my research getting ready for this weekend and watching them against Louisville, Rob Evans is the real deal. He's made a major jump this year. Fastball's better, breaking balls there, changeups there, and JD Arteaga's done a nice job with him. I think him versus Wes on Thursday will be one of the more underrated pitching showdowns in the ACC this season. Lazaro Cholera has been often, he's been up and down. He's had some strings of really good of outings, and then some that he just can't seemingly find a way to get them deep in a ball game. And then Siskar's been there a couple of times. So, has been there for a couple of years and is a sinker baller, right? With a good slider and a really low arm slot. And he can change arm slots and try and just mix and match and try and work deep into ball games by, when it's going well for him, he's going to give up some singles, but he's keeping the ball in the yard and he's letting his defense work. Maybe the worst thing you can have for a ground ball pitcher is a defense that's not able to really pick it behind you. And so Siskar at times has had some ugly numbers especially the last few starts. He has not been able to, be successful for Miami, but it is a good rotation. It's not Florida State's rotation. I don't think it's, Carolina's rotation in this league, but it's a good rotation. And I think Evans makes it a really good, Friday night. This will be Thursday, obviously, with them moving up Thursday through Saturday with the ACC tournament. But I like Evans quite a bit. Now, Florida State's seen all 3 guys that they'll start. They've, the guys who didn't transfer in, sorry, there's a bug flying in my face somehow in my house, but they should have a book on these guys. And it's not a lot of new names. And I think what JD Arteaga wants to do is a pitching plan. So nothing but respect for this Miami team. I think, their wins might be a little inflated at 35-15 because they've been able to buoy it by not playing a very tough schedule. And this is their hardest ACC series to date when you talk about where they're playing it, right? At Hauser, a rivalry, and a top 15 Florida State team. They haven't had to do that yet this year. So I thought it was a red flag when they lost 2 out of 3 to NC State a couple weekends ago in Raleigh. That ended up being a shootout series for the Canes, but you would have liked to see them find a way to beat NC State, who's missing their top two arms in, Marone and Dudan. And, they got bludgeoned by NC State. Their pitching staff did, mostly their bullpen. So keys to victory for Florida State, get to the Miami bullpen. You got to win the Wes Mendez start. I think if Miami loses the Rob Evans start, they're in trouble on the weekend. Also, you'd like John Abraham to be fully available. And if he's not, that changes some things for FSU in the back end of the pen. And then, we'll see what the injury report looks like. I love their offense, though. Like, to your point, it is a really good offense that even without Cuvée has had potency, right? Because Sosa's been a star. That was a terrific get out of the portal from NC State for them. Derek Williams has taken that jump, to stardom this year. And they have some really good players, too, in Sheehan and Dorn, and in Ogden. And then Dubovic and Alvarez have done a nice job, too. And to your point, West has come in and I think he was a transfer from FIU, has done a good job for them. So they hit. They've got some depth. It's not a team that's going to be, with a ton of power, but they can beat you with the long ball. And it's mostly Williams and Sosa that will do it. And I'm curious to see how it plays, right? The emotion of it, Hauser, the juices will be flowing. There's already been smack talk, like we said. Cool. Bring it on. This will be fun. I love this. This is part of what makes the series so special is it matters. And it matters now for Florida State looking for a top 8 seed, and Miami, who could, mathematically with a hot finish, be in the conversation on Selection Monday for a host spot. So that's my long-winded synopsis of the Canes. And, we'll see. If Miami commits 4 errors a game this weekend, you're going to have trouble winning on the road in Tallahassee, especially a Florida State team that's done a good job defensively and played good fundamental baseball. So,
yeah, I was just going to say my biggest key would be just put the ball in play as much as you can because of that defense that Miami has. And I would guess that Link tries to push the envelope a little bit with some small ball stuff and kind of force them into making some plays that they probably haven't made this year. I'll be interested to see if they do try to run on Alvarez, the freshman catcher, just because, he's a freshman catcher in that situation. And Miami for FSU currently is a quad 2 opponent, and it'll stay that way. With quad 2 being 25 to 50 at home. Miami's currently number 34 in RPI. So 3 quad 2 games for FSU to pick up this weekend. But yeah, I think you covered Miami pretty well. There's not too much more to say on the Canes.
Yeah, good baseball team, and will come in hungry because they have something to prove. And for Florida State, I'm just curious to see how they go about things. Again, if Abraham and Williams aren't available for the Noles, it's different. And if Cuvée is available for Miami, that's different, right? So that changes some things. Although if Cuvée is back and he's taking swings for the first time, in over a month, against Florida State staff, there is going to be, kind of a what's the right word there? Reacclimation period for him to try and figure that back out, kind of in the fire of things. So let's talk real quick, 5 minutes, Brett. I know we were about 90 minutes. I'll make sure I segment this when I put it down on the podcast so people can pick and choose what they want to listen to. 450 live viewers right now blows my mind. That's pretty awesome. 90 minutes into it, but pull up that chart, will you, in terms of top 8 seed. Let's get into this about what Florida State, their resume is. I have it there on the banner for those watching. For those listening on podcasts, 36-15 for FSU, 17-10 in the ACC, 7 RPI, SOS strength of schedule of 5, 8-10 versus quad 1, 6-4 against quad 2. Combine those, and you've got 14 Q1 and Q2 wins. I think it's a little light on the quality wins for Florida State, so you'd like to pick up a couple of those somewhere. If that's ACC tournament, great. Obviously, Miami's another Q2. So, Brett, I think the Noles need a sweep this weekend. Like, if you really want to make a statement, you got to win all 3. If you're looking for purely resume, a massive leap forward. Because as those of you watching on your screen, Brett, Alabama, Florida, Southern Miss, A&M, Mississippi State, and even Ole Miss right in the thick of it there for one or two spots. And I think Oregon State and West Virginia are kind of hanging around in the backgrounds for a late finish and some help from other teams of being in the mix too. I did not think Florida State would be in a top 8 conversation at this point after they lost Miles Bailey. And so to that, I think Link Jarrett deserves a ton of praise. I think the team deserves a ton of praise. And the whole group deserves a lot of credit because you put yourself in a position to have the chance to host all the way through Omaha if you take care of business. Miami's in the way. You got 3 games against a decent ball team. And I do think you need to go out there and have another good weekend. How do you stack up Florida State's resume against everybody else that's really battling for the 7 and 8 national seeds?
Yeah, so D1 Baseball and Baseball America both put out their latest projections today. I think the biggest thing right now is 1 through 6 seems pretty locked up, in whatever order you want to say, but those 6 teams seem pretty solidified as top 8 seeds, with UCLA, Georgia Tech, North Carolina, Georgia, Auburn, and Texas being those 6 teams. And then I believe Baseball America both Baseball America and D1 Baseball had Alabama as their number 7 seed. Baseball America had Florida as the number 8 seed, with FSU matched up as the number 9. And then D1 Baseball had Texas A&M as the number 8 seed. And I believe they actually had Southern Miss as the number 9, Florida as the number 10, and FSU as the number 11. So it seems like the conversation is pretty squarely around Alabama, Florida, FSU, Southern Miss, and Texas A&M right now. From the stuff I listened to, the D1. I think it's the Nerdcast that they do. I was listening to them today discuss kind of how they were going about these teams in the discussion. There's RPI. There's also ELO and DSR, and DSR is new. I believe this year is the first year that they're actually it's official, and that's the Diamond sports rating or ranking. FSU is currently number 8 in that compared to number 7 in RPI. I think the big thing right now, I was looking at Florida kind of suspiciously the last 48 hours, so thinking that they would be 8 over FSU is 9 because they have 4 more quad 1 plus quad 2 wins than FSU. They're also number 2 in the country with 15 quad 1 wins. And then obviously, even though it's 3 midweek games, they do hold the head-to-head over you 3-0 with the midweek sweep. So Florida will be tough to overcome, I think. I think the thing for FSU I would point to if I was Michael Alford being the head of the committee is FSU being 7-2 in ACC series and potentially getting to 8-2 if they do what they're expected to do this weekend. Both of those series they lost ended up being sweeps, but I think, the best any of these SEC teams can do is 6-4. No matter what they do this last weekend in their series records, I do think SEC is pretty squarely above the ACC conference ranking wise. But at the end of the day, a lot of this is just going to come down to, are they willing to give the SEC 4 or 5 spots in the top 8? I think if they give them 4, that opens the door for FSU. If they give them 5, then no. But Southern Miss is involved in there too. Southern Miss is 21-9 between quad 1 plus quad 2. And they impressively have the number 7 non-con strength of schedule, which is helping them have the number 9 RPI despite being in the Sun Belt and not actually leading the Sun Belt right now. So I think Southern Miss would probably have to end up winning the Sun Belt, but they're another team that's squarely right in that mix right now with the 3 SEC teams and FSU. And then I think those other teams that were shown, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, both of those teams with what they could potentially do this weekend are more SEC teams that could get in the mix. West Virginia just swept Kansas, who D1 Baseball had Kansas as a top 8 seed last week. Now they're kind of not in the picture at all. But West Virginia could end up winning the Big 12, and they're really well respected in ELO and DSR. And then I also just included Oregon State because they were 8 last year, and they're independent. They don't have a conference, but you made the point to me that their metrics last year were a lot stronger than they are this year. But I just included them because we know they ended up getting that 8th seed last year, and you had to end up traveling out there. So, but they're only 3 games left. They're with Air Force, who's a quad 4 opponent. So a lot of information to take in, but I think right now the biggest thing, like you said, is you just need to go out and win as many games as you can. Like, go out and sweep Miami if you can, and then win a game or two at the ACC tournament and kind of leave no doubt behind. But you're just kind of in the mix with a lot of SEC teams that are all kind of beating up on each other throughout the entire season.
Yeah, I am intrigued with Michael Alford being the chairman of the entire committee, how he views the SEC, because you can't just give the SEC 5, 6 top 8s and say, well, they're the best conference. Well, they get to play each other, which inflates their numbers no matter what. FSU didn't have 35 opportunities at a Q1 this year. Some of these teams, Florida's got 26 games against Q1. I mean, that's crazy. That's 10 more, almost more than what Florida State even has available to it. I do think Florida, having beaten Florida State 3 times, will be significant, especially if they're really close. So you're really rooting for Florida to lose a couple of games at LSU this weekend or flame out of Hoover pretty quickly. I think Alabama playing Georgia this weekend, you're rooting for the Dogs. And Southern Miss, you're rooting for Coastal to win that conference so that Southern Miss is the number 2 seed. Again, ultimately, you nailed it. Is it 5 SEC teams that get a top 8? If that's the case, it's going to be tough for Florida State in the ACC to get 3 national seeds, because I do think Georgia Tech and North Carolina are locked in. And if Southern Miss ends up getting, a top 8 seed, I've gone on record on this podcast before of wanting to reward mid-majors who play tough schedules and do well against them, whether that's Southern Miss or Coastal or Texas State in the past, Stetson, whoever, right, over the years that has made it a point to challenge themselves and then also find some success. It's really hard to get a 9 RPI when you're a program like Southern Miss. And to my point of what I said about the SEC, Southern Miss isn't going to have the same number of opportunities to be able to have Q1 wins on their resume. And I think they've beaten some of the Mississippi schools and they've proven themselves. And, if they finish strong, they deserve a top 8. So how that all shakes out in the end, I go to this question on YouTube from a hopeless romantic with the ACC tournament coming up. Who's a more favorable matchup for UNC or, favorable matchup, UNC or Georgia Tech? I'm less concerned with who's the more favorable matchup in terms of actually beating them and who could help you more with your case for a top 8. I think with Georgia Tech having already played Florida State and having swept FSU and probably gearing toward the top 2 seed, 1 or 2 in, the national seed picture, I think you're closer to Carolina, obviously, and you haven't played them. And if you could somehow finish 2nd and 3rd in the conference in the regular season standings, optics matter. And then maybe the head-to-head for Florida State over Carolina gives the committee just another metric and a wrinkle to have to think about when you look at their overall resumes. So, a sweep over Miami or a series win over Miami for Florida State, and then the opportunity to play North Carolina to really have that head-to-head opportunity and to go 1-0 against them on the year, I do think would be a pretty significant deal. And then you and I have talked about this. Every committee is different with, do they value conference tournaments or not? Some years the answer is yes. Some years the answer is no. And this is your last regular season weekend if you're Florida State to make a statement. And you got 3 against Miami. And Brett, if you win all 3, you would be 20-10 in the ACC, and that is awfully loud for anybody. So I think those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I've got 2 things. One, I'm going to have to pass on facing GT's offense in Charlotte. So I'm going to go with UNC as the more favorable matchup there. But just some fan rooting guides for this week. Obviously looking at the ones that we have on the screen there, you'd hope that the teams that are closest to FSU lose. Southern Miss is playing Georgia Southern is not very good this year, so you hope they lose one. that would hurt them pretty bad. But Texas A&M, they're playing Mississippi State. That one kind of, Mississippi State's right there too. So I don't know, kind of a toss up. But Florida, you hope that LSU can find a way. Florida's playing at LSU. Alabama's playing Ole Miss. And then there's some indirect series that will matter for FSU this weekend. Pretty important, actually. Pitt is close to falling to a quad 3 opponent, as is NC State. If those were to both happen, FSU would lose 6 quad 2 games, and 5 of those being wins, which would really hurt. Obviously that 18-14 mark in quad 2 would fall to 13-13. So, Pitt's playing Notre Dame and NC State's playing UNC. So you want those teams to win. Stanford is also close to falling to a quad 3 opponent. Those were all 3 losses, but it would just hurt even more if they were to fall to quad 3. They play Cal. So you hope that Stanford wins there. And Michigan is right on the line of being a quad 1 opponent. I think they're at 36 in RPI. They need to be top 40 to be a quad 1 opponent. And that being a quad 1 win for FSU from the neutral site in Arlington. They play Ohio State this weekend. So those are some games that are going to matter to FSU's resume if anybody's interested in watching other games in FSU this weekend.
I think from a Noles perspective, it's significant to finish 3rd in the ACC for optics in the regular season. 19 or 20 ACC wins would be pretty significant for the Noles. You want an overall body of work to be able to present to the committee, for Michael Alford to be able to present to the committee that he's leading. And Brett, I think, winning an 8th ACC series on the year in what has been a challenging ACC slate for Florida State would be a big feather in their cap. And if you said FSU was 8-2 this year in ACC series, that I do believe will be on the table, and I promise you will be mentioned when they're deliberating Florida State as a top 8. So how that will happen, by the way, is Florida State has to win 2 of 3 against Miami. Georgia Tech and Boston College play this weekend. I think you're big Georgia Tech fans there, for them to take care of BC at least 2 of 3 and allow you to have that 3 seed going into Charlotte next week for the tournament.
Yeah, and probably should have mentioned that FSU needs 1 win to secure the double bye. And then there's some stuff between FSU and Georgia Tech. I mean, FSU and Boston College, depending on how the Georgia Tech series goes, that will determine the tiebreaker between them. But yeah, you're definitely cheering for Georgia Tech in that series this weekend.
Good stuff, brother. Over an hour and a half. We're only doing 1 podcast this week, is why we went a little longer. So instead of breaking it up into 2 podcast episodes, think of it as a couple of 45-minute pods on the week. And again, we'll segment this in the description so you guys can pick and choose what you want to listen to. But very informative, Brett. I think this is one of our best episodes of the year. Why I think our podcast continues to be, the best FSU baseball podcast out there for fans to listen to, and long-standing over 5 years. A lot we covered here, with a lot of facts, a lot of stats, and a lot of good information. And my favorite time of year, one more, Florida State, Miami, a rivalry to end the regular season, and a chance for FSU to stay in the top 8 mix heading into the postseason. So we appreciate those of you listening. Brett, I think we're going to sign off here, my friend, unless you have anything else to add. We'll be back early next week. Been told Michael Alford will join the ACC Network broadcast this weekend in our booth to talk FSU baseball, and we'll see what we can get out of him in terms of what the committee will be looking for. A good friend of mine and athletic, AD, Vice President Alford, who loves college baseball as much as anybody and played college baseball in his days at Mississippi State. So pretty awesome there. That's something that's unique to us this year, to have him in the booth, to be able to come during Florida State Miami. I was also told, FSU softball fans, Issa Torres is joining us in the booth for Thursday night's game against the Hurricanes. So shout out FSU softball. Hurts that they didn't get a top 8 seed. That's tough to get the 9 seed, but good matchup there against UCLA. And I do think Florida State has a chance, with Issa Torres leading them, to get back to OKC. So that's going to do it for us on this podcast. That's Brett Nevitt. I'm Arya Masudi. As always, thank you, Alumni Hall and Metro Deli. And episode 185 of Sunday Golds is a wrap.